Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. What's up? I've got no rhythm. Today I'm going to do a little update on a couple of reading projects, ongoing reading projects. I've spoken before about what I classify as a reading project. These are entirely voluntary cul-de-sacs of my reading, if you like, where I just on a whim decide that I'm going to pursue something in both of these. And I tend not to do like when the conversation broadened out, people spoke about reading projects as focused on an idea or maybe a piece of history or a particular story and wanted to read all around that. Everyone had written about that. My reading projects tend to be either series or author based. So, for example, I'm working my way through Agatha Christie's Poirot books in publication order. I didn't never, a lot of people have read Agatha Christie over the years. She's justifiably popular, and I had never read them. And if I'm going to read something, I something like that, where there's like 70 of the books, I just tend not to pick them up as I find them, but I think, well, I can make a project of this and start at the beginning, and then I pick them up as I get and do them in order because I'm a bit of a nerd like that. No, I think there is some value in seeing the progression of the characters as an author matures and has more experience time writing a character. So I love reading a series and I like reading them in publication order. But there are other instances where I read an author, have been so impressed or so intrigued by that author's mind and what I've read that I want to read more stuff by an author. So these are two authors. I've spoken about both of these reading projects that I have going on, and I'll take you through. And in the last month or two, I've read a further book by each of these authors, so I'll let you know what's going on. So the first one I'm talking about is James Baldwin, who was always a figure of mine, but I'd never read. And during lockdown, I went to a secondhand bookshop and picked up a copy of If Beale Street Could Talk, this lovely movie tie-in. I haven't seen the movie. There was a massive coffee ring stain on the cover, which I don't tend to clean my books or doing it, but I decided I would just, because it was dirty. I gave that a wipe down, and I love this. And this is a later novel. So one of these authors, the other author, I've only got fiction by. James Baldwin was a prolific writer of essays, non-fiction, as well as a novelist. And so I'm enjoying the fact that I go back and forth between that. This was the first of his work that I read. It's a novel. It's gorgeous. It's sad. It's dealing with the struggles of African Americans in the US. This is, I think, from the 70s, so this is well into Baldwin's career, certainly after his peak as an essayist. And I think of his novels that I've read, and this may be one, two, three, four. I've read three more since this novel. I think this might be his finest so far. So I love that. If Beale Street Could Talk. What else have I got? So then the first non-fiction of his I read was this essay collection, The Fire Next Time. Scathing, angry, terrific. I also read Go Tell It on the Mountain, which was his first novel and autobiographical about his life as a young capable preacher, I guess, in Harlem, and that's just a terrific read as well. Giovanni's Room is a dark, sad love story between unequals. So a poor guy and a rich American in Paris who can always get away. That's great. And I've got this beautiful edition. I just bought this on eBay, but it's part of this Great Loves, Penguin Great Loves collection, with things like other things in the collection are there's Virgil, Boccaccio, Kierkegaard, Ivan Turgenev's First Love, which I've never read, Sigmund Freud's Deviant Love. It's a strange collection. Bonjour Tristesse, which I've got an old Penguin edition of. There's William Trevor, John Updike. It's a weird collection of books that they grouped together, and I don't know why you. Anyway, I'm not going to go and get the rest of the Great Love series, but this was just a nice little pint-sized paperback. And the Go Tell on the Mountain, I've got the is this Signet, vintage, but also sort of cheapo paperback that bought this in the Strand in New York, I believe. This was from eBay. This is also from eBay. Another novel. This is Another Country. This is, what do they call these? The Modern Penguin, Modern Classics. This is the silver one, not the mint with this has a white spine. All these different editions, and I enjoyed this as well. This is like, it's almost 400 pages. So this is a bit of a heavier novel about a self-destructive New Yorker musician, a complicated life and interactions and infidelities. And I don't love. I love the title. I love Another Country as a title. There was a play, right, which became a film called Another Country about spy. It was an early sort of Channel 4 film, and it's got Rupert Everett and Kenneth Branagh and all those that generation of who went on to be big stars. But that's nothing to do with this at all. That's Another Country. And then recently, the most recent Baldwin that I've read, I've gone back to his essays, and I have Notes of a Native Son, which I bought from eBay, and it came already tabbed up with all and lots of. I don't know if you can see the highlighting, and I don't mind. I've got highlighting in pink and say these tabs which I don't use, and I don't really mark up books I'm reading them because I do a lot of reading on Shabbat. Notes of a Native Son, these essays, again, that sort of same, or not same because he's a terrific writer, but that righteous indignation and anger and frustration. But then there's also just good essays and good stories here. One about a tour of Carmen Jones, and very readable, very accessible, and I really enjoyed that. Yeah, I think I don't know how many more works of fiction I have left, but I know there is a bunch more essays, and those are ones I'll be trying to track down. I don't have another Baldwin book waiting for me, and I'm planning 2026 to do rereading more than reading for the first time ever. So I don't know what the next Baldwin book I will read, but I know I will track down more of the essays. But these are the 6 that I've read so far. That's 4 fiction, 2 non-fiction, and highly recommended. Maybe apart from I loved If Beale Street Could Talk. I think other than that, the non-fiction might be more urgent and more fantastic. The other author that I'm pursuing as a reading project is Percival Everett, based on the first of his books that I read, which was The Trees. Read this back in 2021. That was the first time I'd read Everett, and I don't think he'd been on my radar particularly before then. And The Trees was, I think, longlisted and shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and had terrific reviews. And I read it and absolutely fell head over heels for it. I've described it in the past as a blunt instrument rather than a sharp tool cutting at or slicing away at its targets of satire. This is bludgeoning them into submission. But I think this is a great one. And maybe this will be something that I reread next year. But I love The Trees, and having read The Trees and having had the sense that there was a weight of Everett backlist there that I was unfamiliar with, I thought, well, this is an author I would like to read more of, or at least start, and let's see where it takes me. Everett, for the most part, was unpublished in the UK. Maybe there had been some early. Oh, I actually got an early edition of So the next one I read, I think, was Erasure, which was made into the movie American Fiction last year. Terrific movie as well. And Erasure is a great book, and this was actually published by Faber and Faber. So he had been published in the UK, but for many years wasn't. This is Grey Wolf, which I think this is a US edition, I believe. Yes, absolutely, because it says $16 back. So I don't know where I picked up The Trees, maybe from Amazon. But in searching for Percival Everett backlist, it became very hard to find. Now, normally with backlist books, you can find everything on eBay, and if it's a backlist paperback, you can usually find it for under £5. That's in so what's that in dollars? $8. Which is relatively cheap for and that might be even including postage. Relatively cheap for a book which you're paying. For a new paperback now in England, they're all £10 or £11. So to find something for £3, £4, that's my expectation when I go to look for backlist books. in paperback, and usually you can find them in pretty good condition. I'm reasonably sure this was, I've read this and it still looks pretty good, and I would have paid. I got this secondhand, but Percival Everett is extremely hard to find. Now, in the UK, I mainly shop eBay UK. I buy from US stores and sometimes, but for my secondhand books, I mostly buy in the UK because I have them sent to my friend in London. I pick them up from him. And Percival Everett, very, very hard to find secondhand, mostly because the books weren't published in the UK and they're just not around. When I first started looking, I was back in the UK after I'd read The Trees, and you couldn't find them new in stores. You just couldn't find Percival Everett for sale in the UK. Online, I'm sure you could have probably bought them and ordered them, but walking into bricks and mortar stores, they did not have Percival Everett. This was the first time, so I was back in London in August, and it was the first time where I was in bookshops and they had a selection of Percival Everett books, and 3 or 4 of his backlist, and that's partly to do with The Trees being shortlisted, and partly to do with James, of course, which was a massive global smash and won the Pulitzer Prize and other stuff as well. Okay, but so now I think his new books are being published in the UK, and they're starting. Someone has picked up the rights to publish his backlist as well, and they're on sale, but for new prices. Okay, so I read, start with The Trees, then I read Erasure. I've got here Dr. No, which was the next novel after The Trees, which is same title as a James Bond book, and it's a sort of spy spoof, and I wasn't great, but I kept going. I read, this is a super odd one. This is Percival Everett by Virgil Russell by Percival Everett. I guess you'd call this metafiction. And this was quite dense, but weird enough to keep me interested. And then, of course, James came out last year and was a massive smash, and deservedly so. I thought this was a fantastic read. It makes you revisit the idea of Huckleberry Finn. I don't think, I'm making grandiose claims here. I think anyone teaching Huckleberry Finn today, or any student of Huckleberry Finn, I think has to consider James now in framing that. And I know that's a weird idea, that you have to consider a 2024 book when thinking about a book from 150 years ago, but I think this is doing enough and raising enough questions, or just showing enough of an interpretation that says, okay, if you're going to bother to read Huckleberry Finn, and I really think you should because it's excellent, I think you need to read James as well. I think these books are so deeply in conversation with each other across the centuries, and that I think your enjoyment of each will be significantly enhanced by your consumption of the other. Again, I'm trying not to be prescriptive about it, but I think you should read Huckleberry Finn. I think you should read Twain in general. Having read Huckleberry Finn, I think you should read James. And if you read James, I think you should read Huckleberry Finn. I'm not, plenty of people say, oh, you don't need to have read, or you can just read the synopsis. Why do that? I think if you're going to enjoy this, and you will enjoy this, even if you've never read Huckleberry Finn, if you're going to enjoy this, then go back and read Huckleberry Finn as well, before, after, during, whatever you want. This is the richness of literature, and this is about as much richness as literature has to offer you. Enjoy them both. And so the most recent Percival Everett that I read was this, I Am Not Sidney Poitier by Percival Everett, and this is from, when was this published? In 2009. Now this edition, so this is a UK edition, this is now published by Influx Press, so this was published for the first time 10 years after it was published in the US. As I said, he wasn't published in the UK for many years. This has a copyright, an introduction that's copyrighted in 2019, and this may be the first time it was published in the UK in 2019 after it was published in the US in 2009. And here's the thing, so I didn't know much about I Am Not Sidney Poitier, except that the book was called I Am Not Sidney Poitier, and therefore also probably some kind of metafiction. How does Sidney Poitier fit into all this? I understand there may be people watching this who have no idea who Sidney Poitier is. Not quite sure how to deal with that, and so I'm not even going to address it. I'm going to assume that everyone here knows who Sidney Poitier is. Within this book, perhaps those assumptions are required in order to get anything out of this at all. because there are allusions not just to the mad Sidney Poitier, but he's an actor, in case you didn't know, he was an actor, but there are allusions also to films that starred Sidney Poitier. Okay, again, we're just going to have to assume, for the sake of you getting anything out of this, it's not the same as Huckleberry Finn and James. For the sake of anyone getting anything out of this, you need to have seen the words Sidney and Poitier one after the other before and have some kind of recognition of what that is. Even more so in this book, our lead character, whose name is not Sidney Poitier. His first name are the two words together, not Sidney, and his last name is Poitier. So when he says, I am not Sidney Poitier, he is saying, I am not Sidney Poitier, and also I am not Sidney Poitier. That's part of a running joke, and we've seen before in Dr. No and in The Trees that Percival Everett is not afraid of hammering you over the head with a running joke, in a kind of very much kind of dad joke kind of way, where if he finds something funny and he wants you to find something funny, he'll keep hitting that beat. And I'm kind of okay with that as a proponent and lover of dad jokes. I'm kind of here for it. But in addition to you probably needing to at least recognise that there was once a person called Sidney Poitier, one of the characters that are protagonist, whose name is not Sidney Poitier, he ends up living with and being sort of mentored by Ted Turner. Ted Turner, a real, well, I believe he's still alive, a real mogul who founded CNN and at one point was sort of the height of tabloid fodder because he was in a long-term relationship with Jane Fonda, who was at the peak of Jane Fonda's fitness workout. Again, if none of these references mean anything to you, then perhaps skip this in your review of Percival Everett's work. But Ted Turner, inexplicably, is a major character in this book, as is Percival Everett. He's just working on levels that perhaps a lot of fiction readers or fiction writers don't want to bother themselves with. It's not the first time, Martin Amis wrote in his probably magnum opus Money, the character whose name is John Self ends up sitting down in a pub with another character called Martin Amis. I mean, we've seen this kind of thing before. It's always a bit quirky and a bit, well, really? And, you're either going to jump in with both feet. If you're only dipping your toes in, it might look a bit quirky. But Percival Everett, not afraid of being quirky and odd and unexpected, but defiantly original and weird. I really liked I'm Not Sidney Poitier. It kept reminding me of what was the I saw it as a play in London, and it's been made into a film as well. 6 Degrees of Separation by John Guare, Guare, I believe, was the original playwright. Made into a movie with Will Smith. I saw the London production, which still had. It opened in New York and come to London. I think the only character that moved over from London was Stockard Channing, who was Rizzo in the movie Grease. Anyway, and also the First Lady Abigail Bartlett in The West Wing. Anyway, there's a touch. Well, the whole point about 6 Degrees Separation is a character breaks into these wealthy, swanky New York apartment, and then cons them into believing that he is the son of Sidney Poitier. That's the only connection. But that, I got thinking about that. Anyway, this is the 6th Percival Everett novel that I've read. I think probably next up, or the one that is in my head that I should need to read next, is Telephone. But I don't have a copy of that. I shall probably pick one up at some point in the next year, even though next year is supposed to be for rereading. But I'm going to keep going with Percival Everett because he's just interesting and valuable. And I'm so delighted that was my instinct when I read The Trees, was to read him forwards and backwards. So since The Trees, we've had Dr. No and James, but which I enjoyed James much more than Dr. No, and I've gone back and read Erasure and Percival Everett by Virgil Russell by Percival Everett, and also I Am Not Sidney Poitier. I'm delighted. I also read a book by his wife, Color Television, by Danzy Senna. Which I didn't love all that much. But I'm delighted that my instinct on The Trees was to read more Percival Everett. I have done. I'm pleased with the way this project is going. It will continue for the foreseeable. Baldwin also, I've got more essays to read. Some might be harder to track down, but I might end up having to buy one of those massive hardback collected editions of all his essays, which will end up probably including some of the ones I've already read. But there's some harder to find ones that haven't been anthologized as much. But two reading projects which I took upon myself and still energized, and not just because I'm a completionist. I could stop if I was getting nothing out of this. I wouldn't seek out backlist books, buy them, have them delivered, chase them down and read them. But two reading projects which I'm pleased that I began and continue to be delighted by the experience. What reading projects are you in the middle of and not looking to stop anytime soon? Take care. God bless. Bye.